The field is set, but seeding still matters. Who's in and who's out? Which teams are traveling early? And what squads get the extra rest? We crowned a regular season champion, and their star could sweep the awards again? Even the major awards. A coach made history and players hit major milestones. Tons to recap on episode 2 of MAAC Men's Monday right here on MAAC Mania. Mike Duda, JJ Garcia with you. And we will preface by saying, unfortunately, there is no video component today for those that watch on YouTube. That is because here at Marist University, we are completely snowed in, but that did not go without effort. Both JJ and I did walk in blizzard-like conditions to try to get to the studio, but unfortunately, we were unsuccessful in doing so. Regardless, we still very much so appreciate you tuning in, and if you're here on Substack, well, nothing really changes because there was no video to begin with. So, JJ, I'll start with asking, how are you during this snowy weather?
I'm good. It was a fun trek over to the studio. Sadly, it was not open, but it was a fun time and we tried every single door. But other than that, everything's going good.
Everything is going good. Well, that is completely true for the Merrimack Warriors, who, JJ, as we recap the current MAC men's basketball standings, sit atop.
Yeah, Merrimack sitting at top 16-2 in conference play. They're on an 8-game win streak. They have 2 games remaining, but as you mentioned it, they clinched the MAC regular season championship on Sunday. So huge thing for them, especially with Joe Gallo. He's a great head coach for them.
They clinched at least a portion of the MAC regular season championship with their win on Friday night. That actually came on ESPNU over the Siena Saints. Again, we'll talk more later when we get into the individual storyline segment and also when we get into the score segment. But that is where the original celebration occurred. However, in the latter game of the week on Sunday, they officially did it. Just their second season since transferring to the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference, and they are already regular season champs. Well, a storied school is the St. Peter's Peacocks, who roll in second place right now, 12 and 6.
Yeah, St. Peter's sitting at 12-6. They are on a 2-game losing streak right now, but they do hold the tiebreaker over Siena, who is in third place. Siena also 12-6, 4 games back, but they are on a 1-game win streak. But again, this St. Peter's team, they do hold the tiebreaker over the Siena team, and we know how dangerous St. Peter's can be.
Well, that was most especially prominent in 2022 when they, against all odds, made a run to the Elite Eight, the only team, at least then, in NCAA history as a 15 seed to make it all the way to the Elite Eight. That gave Run Baby Run Arena a nice boost because there, of course, are financial incentives involved with going so far in the tournament. Now, they beat Merrimack at Run Baby Run Arena. That was back on the 11th of January. That is why they have the tiebreaker over Siena right now. But the Saints come in also with a 12 and 6 record in third place.
Yeah, and both teams been playing really good basketball so far. Obviously, Siena did lose to Merrimack on ESPNU the other night, but this St. Peter's team, they are so strong, so good. Obviously, we'll touch on that more a little later. Another team who's playing really good recently, it's our very own, the Marist Red Foxes. They're sitting at 12-7 in the conference. They're on a 2-game win streak. Obviously, a huge win against Manhattan on Friday, a huge win last night against Sacred Hearts, which we'll cover that later on as well. But one of the teams who is doing the complete opposite as the Red Foxes in the last 2 games. It's the Quinnipiac Bobcats. They're 11-7 in the conference. They have a 2-game losing streak and just dropped a game to the Fairfield Stags, in which was a very, very interesting game yesterday.
Now, at this point, after we have gone over the top five seeds, going into the week, this is where we would have drawn the line of, okay, these are the teams that have clinched, these are the teams that have not yet clinched. But the field became set on Friday night. Again, when we get into our scores segment, we will explain this a little bit more in depth. But the field is now officially set. That happened on Friday night. So the remaining teams that we talk about until we start getting to the Buffalo schools have officially clinched a spot in Atlantic City. We'll talk a little bit later, actually, in this segment about how they can get that first round bye. But we'll kick it off with Fairfield. They are 10 and 8. The Mount also 10 and 8, but Fairfield owns the tiebreaker. Why is that, JJ?
Yeah, Fairfield owns the tiebreaker right now. The reason for that is because the Stags are 0-1 versus Merrimack. The Mount is 0-2 against Merrimack, which kind of gives them that upper hand. So because of that, Fairfield has the tiebreaker. But the Mount, they close the season with another game on Sunday. And this Fairfield team, you mentioned them, they are so good. They're on a two-game win streak, but they just took down Quinnipiac. They've really picked it up, as well as this Mount team as well. They do have a four-game win streak, but because of their records against Merrimack, Fairfield does hold the tiebreaker over the Mount.
Now, personally, there is such a high probability of that last game of the year between Fairfield and the Mount being who gets the sixth seed. I personally believe that should be on ESPNU, but instead it is Marist St. Peter's in Poughkeepsie that was flexed to that spot. I think just from a standing standpoint, that is why the game should be on national television. But I understand why it is Marist and St. Peter's. The ratings are going to be a lot higher. It's two likely better teams overall. But regardless, that should be fun to wrap up the week. How about this? Iona has jumped up to eighth place at 8-10.
Yeah, Iona just jumping up out of nowhere. Even after losing the last game on Sunday, they still jump over Manhattan and Sacred Heart, which Manhattan is 8-10 as well, but Iona does hold that tiebreaker over Manhattan, and Sacred Heart drops all the way down to 10th place at 8-11. They're on a two-game losing streak, but they don't have anything to worry about. They are still in the MAAC tournament, even in that 10th spot because they did clinch. But this is Iona team jumping up two spots to get into that sole eighth seed right now is huge for this Iona Gales team.
We'll talk a little bit later. It is not possible for them to get the bye, despite it mathematically looking so. And it's the same thing for the Jaspers. Now, they don't own the bye over the Gales because of a January 24th loss in New Rock City. And you might say, hey, they close out the season with one another on Sunday, another good game that should determine tiebreakers, but it doesn't matter because Iona beat Merrimack back on the 22nd. That was a really successful week for them. And because of that, Iona will definitively have the tiebreaker over Manhattan moving forward.
Yeah, that's huge. Just from a standpoint of where you play, obviously, it really doesn't, like you said, it doesn't matter too much because they won't get that bye in the first round. But it also brings a sense of confidence to your team that you aren't in the bottom two, you aren't playing in those games. You are a little higher up in the standings. You got a little bit of cushion. You don't have to worry about this game as much on Sunday against Manhattan, and that's a huge factor. Obviously, you still want to go out and win that game, but it doesn't really have too many implications on where you seed or anything like that.
It does not, especially because right now they are slotted in at the 8 and the 9, which would be the first game for the men's side. It's not the first game down in Atlantic City, but it would be the first men's game that is played, and they're going to play each other, and there's no form of a home field or home court advantage since you are in that neutral site down on the boardwalk. Right now, slotted in at the 10 spot, and the last team that has clinched a playoff spot are the Sacred Heart Pioneers at 8-11.
Yeah, the game last night against Marist was a very rough loss for them. They would have really liked to take that one. They are the third best scoring offense in the MAC, which we'll kind of touch on that a little later. But this Sacred Heart team, even though they're in the 10 spot, they are dangerous. They do have some flaws to them, but last episode we were very high on this. At least I was very high on the Sacred Heart team. They did drop two games in a row, but again, it doesn't fully matter. They are in the playoffs. They are in the MAC playoffs. They still have a chance to go on a run and do special things, but they will be slotted in that 10 spot. Most likely, that's where they will finish this year.
The 10 spot and above, something that both Buffalo Schools and Ryder cannot accomplish. JJ, where are the final three at officially eliminated from the postseason in terms of record?
Yeah, in 11th place, it's Niagara Purple Eagles. They're 4-14. They're 12 games back on a two-game losing streak. Right behind them, it's Canisius Golden Griffs. They're 4-14 as well, 12 games back on a one-game losing streak. And then the Ryder Broncs are rounding it out in the 13th spot. They are 3-15 and on a one-game winning streak. But again, those winning streaks don't really matter. All three of these teams are eliminated. They don't have a chance at the playoffs. So not really much to talk about with these teams. They still put up some really good games. They played good games here and there, but not too many bright spots for either of these teams. All three of these teams were the bottom three scoring teams in the MAC this year.
No hopes of getting to Jim Whelan Boardwalk Hall. That is because the playoff field, of course, is set. But there are still two open bye spots that have not been clinched for three teams who can mathematically earn it. Now, there is a way that when you look at the standings, you might say, oh, isn't there a mathematical odd for Iona and Manhattan? There are not. We will get to that momentarily because right now the current byes are Merrimack. Obviously, they already clinched the number one seed. They are slotted in to finish number one in the conference. St. Peter's, Siena, and Marist have also claimed a bye. Now, if you're looking for the possible seeds of your favorite team, stay tuned on Friday for a special edition of the MAAC Mania podcast. That is going to be where we break down every single possibility for the remainder of the season to see where your favorite team could lie based on how every single game happens. But here's how each of the three teams can clinch a bye. Let's start with Quinnipiac. They lose the tiebreaker to Fairfield, particularly because of yesterday's loss to the Stags. It split the season series, and the Bobcats are 0-2 against Merrimack. Fairfield is just 0-1. Therefore, Quinnipiac needs two wins if they don't want to rely on help from the Stags, or a win and a Fairfield loss will clinch a top six seed for the team in Hamden. In terms of overthrowing the Mount, a win or a Mountaineers loss will do the trick. So it should be pretty easy for Quinnipiac to get into the top six. They basically either need a win or a Mount loss, and they will accomplish the feat. However, it might be a little bit more difficult to get that top five seed. Let's talk about Fairfield. Because of the aforementioned tiebreaker over both Quinnipiac and the Mount, they are in a decent enough spot. If the Bobcats lose one more game, Fairfield has to win both this week. But if Quinnipiac goes 0-2, Fairfield only needs one win. And you would hope for them that is against Mount St. Mary's to close out the year. But on the Mount side, you, of course, hope that it comes against the Stags because their road to a bye more or less is simply beating out the Stags. They need to, at minimum, match Fairfield on Friday. So if the Stags win, the Mount also has to win. If Fairfield loses, the Mountaineers, they can lose as well. It would obviously be better for them if they win, but it doesn't really matter because it all comes down to that Sunday matchup. So from there, the last game of the year determines the bye. Mount St. Mary's versus Fairfield at Mahoney Arena. That should be a really good one. Now, for you Gales and Jaspers fans out there, though by the numbers, it looks like they can still get a top six seed. Tiebreakers work against them. Iona lost a January 30th Friday night contest, 71-70, a heartbreaker in New Rock City to Fairfield, and then they dropped their home game to the Mount a week later after losing to them in Emmitsburg earlier this season, so they cannot get the tiebreaker. And as for Manhattan, they also lost the Mount on the road on the first of the month by 7, and thus the mathematical tiebreakers that they can earn over Fairfield is mute. So the top six is being fought for right now by three teams that have not yet clinched. Four already have, and a big part of that was this week's games, which we will get to in our next segment.